Welcome to this deep dive into the game that won Best in Show at DemoFest 2023 at Learning Solutions Conference. My name is Kai Dean. I'm a designer, I'm a developer. I built the game, and we're going to take a brief look at the way the game works, and then we're going to take a deep dive into the inner workings of the game so that you can see how it was built, it was constructed, and perhaps you can take away some tips and tricks for your own storyline projects as you work away. So thank you very much for joining me. I hope you find this helpful, interesting, and informative. So let's dive right in. So the first screen you arrive at is the welcome page. Here we see the overview of the rules and the option for you to choose how many players are going to play the game. Now, for the purposes of this demo, we built it so that you could have up to 4 players or 4 teams, but it is conceivable you could have as many players as you wanted to if you were willing to duplicate various triggers within the actual storyline file. So you choose your number of players and you click Let's Play. Along the bottom here, you'll see that the number of players is based on what you chose. So if you only chose 1, there would just be the 1 player shown at the bottom here. The team whose go it is designated by the spinning red circle. So this will move along as each team has their go. The counter for each player will show up on the board one at a time. That was deliberate. Originally, we tried to have all of them up on the board at the same time, which works fine when they're not on the same space. But as soon as they all land on the same space, you can't see which one's which because they all occupy the same positioning. So it was difficult to define which one was which. So we decided that it worked better that if just the single piece was on the board at the time. Now, it's worth pointing out at this stage that this game was a physical board game that we built for a client for a face-to-face meeting. It was a face-to-face event, in fact. They wanted this game to be virtualized because at that time there were still parts of their business who were not meeting face-to-face, and they wanted a virtualized version. Now, eventually they were all opened up for business and we didn't use the virtualized version, so we debranded it and turned it into this general knowledge game. But it is exactly the same game as we built for the client in the real world and virtual. So the game works just like any other board game, really. It's got a randomized dice in the middle here. When you click the roll the dice button, it will roll the dice and give you a randomized number like you would in the real world. We built in a few mechanisms here to try and stop cheating. So, for example, if you went beyond your place that you were supposed to go based on your dice roll, it will tell you off for trying to go too far and it will automatically move you back. We did allow, though, the user to move their piece backwards if they wanted to. So there's a certain amount of cheating that can be done in the game. That was deliberate, just to add a little bit of fun. I'm certain that every one of us has cheated at a board game at some point. Perhaps that's part of the fun of playing a board game. As you go around the board, you'll see that the card that you're landing on, so the blue card, which is movies, becomes available. When you move to the green one becomes available, yellow, blue, etc. So it does only activate the card that you're on, which means you can't pick up a card. So I can't pick up a general knowledge or a music card. I can only pick up a movies card. So when you click on the movies card or whichever card you've landed on, it will bring up a randomly drawn card from a deck of questions, which you then answer. So if you answer the question correctly, you will get 10 points, or in this case, if you answer incorrectly, you'll get 0 points. It then automatically moves on to the next team, and then you'll see here the green counter is now up on the game board. So again, if you roll the dice, we've got a 5 this time, so we pull the counter way around to 5, and then it's general knowledge this time. And when the question comes up and they get it correct, they'll gain themselves 10 points. And the object of the game is to get to 100 points. The original version of the game, the client had the teams collecting cards, which each team had to get to a certain number of cards to win their game. So that's the way the original game worked, but we made it just so it's the first team to get to 100 points. So they continue to roll the dice and they can go around the board infinitely. So there's no stopping point. I'll show you how this works in a moment, but you get the idea. So it works just like a regular board game, and the points will continue to accrue. And at the end, there's a celebration screen with a little AR interaction at the end. So that's how the actual game works. So we'll show you now the inner workings, the nitty gritty, the stuff that you really want to see of how the actual game is built. So here we are in Storyline, and at first glance, there's quite a lot to look at. There's lots of layers, there's lots of slide layers, there's lots of actual layers on the slide, there's lots of triggers, etc. But the basics here, they're not terribly complex. There's just lots going on within them. So the very first thing that I want to point out, and I brought this up a lot at DemoFest, was that this game has been built without JavaScript entirely. There's no JavaScript used whatsoever. A few people doubted that, but I can assure you there is no JavaScript in here. The reason for that was that I want to be able to pass this along to somebody in my team, for example, who doesn't know JavaScript and are able to edit it, or if a client wanted it or something like that, they can take it on without having any specialist knowledge. I do believe that anybody with a decent level of Storyline understanding and knowledge could actually edit this file. So we'll start off with the way in which the counters work. So the counters, I asked a few people at the conference whether they could work out how the counters were going around the board, and they were restrained to that area of the game board. Nobody actually guessed, but actually it's just dials. So I made a custom dial for each one of the counters and set it up around the game board. There are enough positions there for each point on the game board, and you simply drag the counter around a dial. The difference with these ones are the actual dials here. They have the maximum number of rotations that you can possibly have in Storyline. So currently the maximum rotation is 9,450 degrees. That means that it will keep on going around for whatever 9,450 divided by 360 is. So it'll go around that many times before it has to stop. I did put in a little failsafe in there as well, that if it were to get to that high, then it does reset to 0. So it does essentially go around infinitely, as I've already said. Each dial, each counter has a variable assigned to it, dial 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they are incremented as they go around. But the way in which I tracked the position of each counter on the game board was not actually using the values coming in from the dial. They are used for other things. But the way in which I tracked the location of the counter was slightly more simple. It was going to be very complex to try and use the values from the variables to keep track of where the pieces were, because obviously we're going up to 9,450 degrees. So there were a lot of steps. I've put in 945 steps. But the reason for it was, in fact, it was just very difficult to keep track of. So I came up with a slightly simpler way of tracking it, and that was using what I call hit areas. Inside this group here, on each of the spaces here, there is a little rectangle. So each space has a rectangle, and basically what happens is when the counter is dragged around, I've got a load of triggers here that say that when counter 1, for example, intersects any of one of these pieces, then it sets hit blue 1 to true. So I had different hit areas for each of the colors. So the blue ones, the green ones, and the yellow ones. And then they set their relevant variable to true when the counter intersects. So that's where lots of triggers start to come in, because obviously you need to set each one to true and to false. Now you could toggle. I did think about it. I don't find toggling to work very well in Storyline, so I kept it so that you had a whole bunch of triggers that would set it to true. And when they stop intersecting, it sets that variable to false. And that's true of each one of them. So the green ones, the yellow ones, and the blue ones. And then that's duplicated for each of the counters as they go around. Now, while there's a lot of duplicating there, but actually it's relatively simple to do that. Once that's done, that's easy and it works, as opposed to trying to calculate exactly how many times they've gone around the board, divided by how many stops there are on the dial, etc. It would be very complicated to try and figure out exactly where they are at all times. So this seems to be a simpler way to keep track of the dial, the counters on the dial. So that is the way in which the pieces go around the game board. So next is the roll the dice button. Again, it's relatively straightforward how it works. The user clicks on the roll the dice button, and then it runs through a series of triggers. So the first one is an animation. So it moves the dice along a motion path, which is up here. So you see a crude motion path here, and the dice rotates a little bit as it goes down, and gives the appearance that the dice is being actually rolled. Within the dice here, you can see the states as you would expect. So each face has its own state. So that gets set based upon what number is rolled. So it animates, it then shows a layer called set dice. Now, when I used to write code, we used to use functions within the code, and functions would be reusable pieces of code that you could trigger at any point when you wanted to reuse something. So rather than rewriting that piece of code over and over, you would contain it within a function, and then you could then call it whenever you want. So I treat slide layers like this. So I contain, within this slide layer here, I contain a lot of functions that are a lot of triggers that would be reused over and over. So here is where the dice is actually set, the appearance of the dice. So based on the number that's rolled, so if dice number is 1, then it sets the state of the dice to dice number 1, to position number 1. So as we come back here, so the next one is the actual generation of the number. This is randomized. I was surprised, a few people were surprised that they didn't realize that you could generate random numbers in Storyline. You can, it's relatively straightforward. It worked perfectly well for the roll of the dice. The randomization can sometimes be a little bit too repetitive, but it does work perfectly well for the function that I needed within this game. So here, dice num, which is the value of the dice, it's set to a random number between 1 and 6. So it just generates that number. Then after that happens, it sets the dice to dice done to false. So the dice hasn't been rolled yet, so it's still active. It then sets the state of disable. So there's an overlay on top of here called disable, which stops anybody from being able to click on the counters or click on the dice or whatever. So it's sort of a global sort of stop everything from being clickable way. It's just a button that sits over the top. Essentially, it's just a shape. But once it's got a trigger assigned to it, it becomes a button, and it stops anything else underneath it from functioning. So it's quite a good way of stopping all buttons from working globally. Next one is show layer position. Now, position is another one of my function style layers. And this particular one is how the position that the counter has to move to based on the dice roll. So I have a variable here called position tracker. Position tracker is used consistently throughout. So it says set position tracker to dial 1. So you spoke about earlier about each of the dials have a variable assigned to it. So dial 1 is the first one. So it says basically what it's saying is if we're on T number 1, then we're going to save the position of the dial, the current position of the dial to position tracker. So position tracker becomes the value of dial 1 or dial 2, 3, or 4, depending on which player is playing. And at the end, we add the value of the dice to that position. So for example, if they are on position 1 here, it will therefore say, right, position tracker equals 1. Then it adds 6, for example, because that's the dice number that's been thrown, and it adds that, so therefore it knows it has to go to position 7. So it's just an easy way, relatively easy way of just calculating where it needs to go. And that's how the cheat function, where it tells you off for going too far, that's how that functionality works there later on in the game. So that's position, and then we set the state of button roll to disabled. So as a catch-all, I make sure that the roll the dice button is disabled, so we can't roll the dice more than once. So they can only click it once, so that stops any sort of cheating to try and get a number that they're actually after to win the game, maybe to get onto a bonus square or something like that. So that's how the roll the dice functionality works within the game. So the last thing we're going to look at are the game cards around the outside of the game board. So these are each, when you click on them, they draw a random question out of the question bank. I'll show you the question banks in a moment. But first of all, you've seen as you go around the game board, only the position you land on, the card becomes available. So if you land on the green, only the green becomes available. The blue is only available, the yellow or the dark blue. So I'll show you how that works first of all. Now, just as a side note, I always start in a storyline file. I like to have triggers that are going to do sort of the initial pieces of work that we need to do. So right at the very beginning, when this timeline starts, it shows the team choice layer, which is where they select the number of players. Then it shows set cards. So that's what we're talking about right now. So here we go to set cards, and it shows this again, like one of my function layers. And here are the triggers which will show and hide the cards when they are selected or not selected. So we have one for each of the card types. So here we have, so hit D blue 1 is dark blue, and that's for team number 1. So that's why there are 4 for each one. Here we see, so when the hit area changes, so that's the little markers that we went through earlier on. When that the counter intersects with one of those markers, that changes, and it sets the state of dark blue to normal. If that marker of a dark blue marker is true, and it sets the dark blue one to disabled, which is a sort of a grayed out sort of alpha transparency version of it, if the hit area is false. So each of those has a true or false statement to it. Originally, I wrote these with if and else statements. So within storyline now, you can say if hit D blue 1 equals true, then do something, else do something else. And again, I found the else aspect of the if statements not to work terribly well. And quite often I found that if I've got a problem, it's because I've tried to use else instead of separating out the triggers. So for the time being, there's 2. It would be much easier if you managed to get the if and else to work. So by now, hopefully that works better. But when I was building this, the if and else wasn't working terribly well. So here we see, as the counter goes around, it changes the state of that counter to the variable associated with that marker to true. Then it will change the visibility of the card. So it does that for each one. And that changes each one to available or unavailable based on where the counter is. Then we show layer disable cards. So that actually turns off all of the cards, which does a global turning them all off, which is fine because in set cards, the visibility of the card is only set based on the variable changing. So we're not overriding that. It's just setting up, it's sort of laying the groundwork for what we're going to do going forward. Then there's a couple of other variables here, position we've gone through. And this one here is just setting how many points each question's worth. So currently each question is worth 10 points. It could be worth whatever we want it to be worth. So that's how they are actually functioning. So once they are available, they can click on the card and then it goes to a question bank. So if we go to the story view here, you can see all of the slides that are associated with the file. These ones here, they are not actually functioning here. I kept duplicates of the game cards just so I had them there. They are not actually used. Down here is where the question banks are. Now, before working on this particular file, I hadn't really used question banks very much. Something to note for your own work going forward, you need a quiz results slide for this to actually work. Otherwise, the randomization doesn't work. So that's worth bearing in mind. So basically, when they click on a yellow or a green or a blue or a dark blue, it draws from the appropriate question bank. So here's the green one, and each one is here. I think I've got about 20. Yeah, so there's 20 questions in each. Obviously, you could have as many as you want. It draws questions randomly. It includes every one of the questions, and it pulls one out as you click on it. Now, the thing I found with it, and I don't know whether it's because of the way I've built it, but on a number of occasions, we've had the same question come up more than once in a row. So the randomization sometimes is a little bit hit and miss. So there are things that we could build into this to make sure that it does always choose a new question. But for the purposes of this game, we didn't do that. So that's the question bank. So let me just show you what the actual games look like here. So the actual questions. So these are just multiple choice slides. I inserted a pick one template. I then customized it with my own look and feel. So they just choose the one. So within the form view, it's exactly the same as anything else that I'm sure everybody has built once or twice before in their life. So basically it has all the options, choose the correct answer, and then the submit is just actually clicking on the question. So there's not a submit button or OK or anything like that. It's just simply you click on the answer and then it submits it to correct or incorrect. And then it's got a little indicator there to show which answer was the correct answer. So that's the same throughout all of the questions. So we've got 20 in each, and then the bonus cards. I think there were less bonus cards. I think we did, how many did we do here? 3, 6, 9, 12. So there's 12 bonus cards, which these ones work in a similar sort of way, but basically they're not quizzes. They are just bonuses. So on this particular one here, they lose 5 points. So we have variables and various triggers here to subtract points from the current team's tally. We also have multipliers. So there's a plus 10 there. And we did so here's a couple of multipliers. So you can have a doubler where they can double their score. So they're all basically put together. The questions open up in a light box, which recently, not recently, when it was built, I knew it was slightly tricky to use. Not tricky to use, but the problem with the light box, in my opinion, is that you have no control over the close button. So when the actual game is running, there's a close button when you open up a card. Now, if you click on the close button currently in this version of the game, it stops the player, the actual player, the next team. It doesn't progress to the next team in the game. So it's a bug, but it's not a bug because I don't have any control over the actual close button. Now, I can affect the close button if I use JavaScript, but as I've said already, the point of the game was to build it without JavaScript. So hopefully at some point we'll have some sort of control over the close button in the lightbox view. So the lightboxes close themselves after a 4-second time. So basically it says close the lightbox when the timeline ends. So currently there's 4 seconds for each. We could reduce that to try and reduce the possibility of someone pressing the close button, but currently it's set to 4 seconds. So that's the way around at the moment. The other way to do it would have been not to use light boxes, but I quite like the contextual, I like to, it's in context. I like to see the question in context over the top of the actual game board. I quite like that. So I like to use the light box in that situation. So that's how the question cards work for the game. Well, that's everything. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found that interesting and informative. It was slightly longer than I anticipated it being, but we got into a few of the details there. If you do have any questions or any comments, then I would love to hear them. Please leave a message down below in the comment section. You can also find me on LinkedIn and on the eLearning Heroes website via Articulate. So if you do have any questions, please do reach out. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.